Vanakkam and welcome to Cinema Express. This is Avinash Ramachandran. Today we have Kantara Cinematographer Arvind S Kashyap. Welcome to our show, Arvind.
Thank you so much, Avinash.
So firstly, did you see the film in theaters on the first day with the audience?
Yeah, we did. Unfortunately, I saw it in a premiere show with all the celebrity guests and all that.
Okay.
So I didn't get the kind of response I was expecting. But then next day, I went and watched it with real audience. That was crazy.
And the cinematographer is the first audience for a film because you are the one who is filming it. And so when you watch the film with the audience, did you feel that the goosebumps or the high moments that you had was translated on screen also?
Yeah, that happened to me, and I've seen it approximately. I've seen more than 200 times now. But
Lovely.
still, when I watched it for the first time in theater with common audience, I felt the goosebumps too. So and I could see everyone go through the same feeling.
And then everyone's talking about that last final act with Rishab Shetty just
Yeah.
losing it and the whole sequence. So let's start with filming those sequences because those like the Bhutakola sequences and the final act, everything together. How was it
Yeah.
to firstly film these things because it's easier said than done because you have someone performing it. You need to ensure people around the performance are still. They are not moving here and there. You need to do all those things. So how do you get those things in place?
First of all, it was very challenging for me, especially because I'm from Bangalore
Uh-huh.
and I have not seen a lot of Bhutakola, or I have not been exposed to this culture, the coastal culture especially. So during pre-production, we did watch a lot of kolas. Rishabh would take me to real kolas where they perform,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I started off from. And I did a lot of research. I started watching tons of YouTube videos of these kolas, and the main challenge was to make it look realistic and yet make it look cinematic as well. And especially when Rishabh was performing, because he's not a professional performer, it was very difficult for him if we had to do one more, because he would put all his energy into one particular take,
Correct.
and we had to make sure that we got whatever he did. We couldn't
Mm-hmm.
ask him to do one more because he used to go all in
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
So that was our one big challenge. We had to be technically perfect. We couldn't ask one more either because of focus or some lighting issues.
Mm-hmm.
And another main technical issue we had was we realized that we had to shoot this continuously, because
Right.
once while he's performing, he's in the zone. And if you ask him to take a 5 or 10 minutes break because we had to change lighting, he would probably not be in the same zone.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did is, before shoot, we did a pre-lighting where we lit up entire 360 degrees of the place where Bhutakola was performed.
Right.
So anytime we had to switch between axes, we took hardly 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
would turn off one set of lights and turn on other. So this way we made sure that he's always in the zone and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't zone out in between takes.
And the film is shot on real locations, and you need to use the perfect lights to ensure. Because a lot of night shoots are there. There are a lot of rain
Yeah.
shots here. A lot of fire, a lot of smoke. So how was it for you? Because as you said, you're from Bengaluru. You're moving to a place. The terrain is new. The locations are new. The atmosphere is new. How do you get into that? Because how much of pre-production went into those angles to get the nature as part of your film?
From our initial days, Rishabh's brief was that the days of Kantara had to look really beautiful,
Hmm.
because the whole movie is about that land.
Yeah.
But the nights had to be very mysterious and borderline scary and mysterious.
Yeah.
So even when we used to go and see the locations look beautiful during the day, and during nights, whatever you see in the movie, there were a lot of things happening. Some of it actually happened. So
Right.
when we went for a recce, it was quite scary to see these locations at night. And another big challenge was, locations were huge and they look beautiful. And I would look at them and feel happy that we have such good locations, and at the same time freak out, wondering how I would light such a big area.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
most of the night scenes are spread out over almost half a kilometer or more than that.
Right.
So we had to figure out a way, and we couldn't get a conventional moon box. We usually get moon box for night, and we
Correct.
get balloon lights.
Yeah.
We didn't have access to any of that because the roads were inaccessible and it was inside a forest.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to figure out our own ways of lighting such a big area.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent most of our pre-production doing this, planning lighting over such big areas. And even Bhutakola, wherever Bhutakola happened, that was also inside a forest where we didn't have access to crane. Or
Mm-hmm.
usually, I would have preferred to get a 100 feet crane and put a light on top of it.
Correct.
We couldn't do it, so we figured out a way of putting these Chinese lanterns, almost 50, 60 of them on top. And so as and when we saw different scenes, we had to figure out our own ways to make up for the terrain, one of our biggest challenges. And even rain,
Yeah.
the rain sequence, the pre-climax rain fight, it was completely open everywhere. Usually in nights, if you have some background, you can light it up and you can create depth. But when you're shooting in a completely open area, it's very difficult to light up, because and most of the shots are almost 180 degrees to 270 degrees.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
And biggest fear was wherever we put the lights, they would come in frame.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out a way of hiding lights behind the sets, putting them very far away, and moving our cameras in such a way that we always had lights at the edge and we wouldn't get them in frame.
Yeah.
So that was again a biggest challenge to do that.
And talking about because the expanse is wide, you're having a lot of empty spaces. So there's at one end you have a lot of empty spaces. At one end you are moving into constricted when he's running, when he's doing the bhutakola, all constricted spaces. So how much of it, like let's say you had prepared something beforehand, you go on the sets, and then something else happens because let's say a tree is there, a tree falls or something. You never know what happens in a forest, right? So how much of it is improvisation on the set? Because you must have had a lot of things well prepared, and then you land on the set, and then there's something completely new there. So were there
Yeah.
things like that happened?
Yeah. After this movie, I realized that there's nothing called over preparing, because I used to always come to the set thinking we have prepared a lot. Then no amount of preparation would actually prepare us to what the experiences we had.
Right.
It was mostly on the go kind of lighting. Luckily for us, because we had an idea of what we wanted it to look like, and we had a brief with my team, with my gaffer, and with my lighting team. We had a brief idea of what our lighting would look like. So we would kind of change it according to the constraints we had on spot. There were times when we would put up light across a hill, and then it would start raining, and then we had to
Right.
switch off light between. So we had to find our way through this. And there were times when we would put gels on some lights and they would burn up, and we couldn't have them again during other nights.
Right.
So it was mostly figuring out things and doing it, because we shot across 4 forests in the night.
Mm-hmm.
So from one forest to another, we kept improvising.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we finally came to the last forest, we kind of figured out what we had to do.
What all the jugards were in place.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those stunt sequences because those are very, very real, as you said, very realistic and still has a very cinematic touch to it. It's not
Yeah.
too raw. You know you're watching cinema, but then it's a new experience. Like you may take the
Yeah.
Kambala shot. There's this when he's on when he's high, and there's the whole pre climactic sequences. So how was it to
Yeah.
shoot those stunt sequences? And also, I had to ask you this: when generally you see people going close to a lot of dirt and water splashing, how do you ensure your camera doesn't have those splashes on it? So how do you shoot those?
So yeah, so our agenda for all the fights was that they had to be immersive, and every fight in their own ways. There was one, this Kamala fight, which was in the Kamala water,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was muddy water. So unless we had the camera almost close to water or close to where the artists were fighting, you wouldn't feel that immersed into the fight.
yeah.
So I most of this fight was handled. We had a new camera called Red Raptor. This is very
Hmm.
tiny compact camera which you can hold in your hand. I took it and I went into the field, and there's one particular shot where at the end, uh, uh, Shiva puts one guy down to the water,
Down and then, yeah,
uh, down, and that's when some water got into the camera.
right, right.
So we took a lot of precautions, but we couldn't help. So we had covered the camera completely, but the way he got him down, there was some water which entered from below. But luckily, nothing happened to the camera.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's we had to be with them inside Kamala
Mhm.
fight. So even when Rishab is getting up or when he's falling down into water, I went as close to him as possible to kind of feel like you're really there. And most of
Mhm.
the shots are wide angle onto face,
Yeah.
so that kind of gave a sense that you're actually there.
And when you're doing a film like Kantara, where there's a lot of jump scares, there is a lot of horror per se elements to it. And when you think of jump scares, you don't really connect it with the visuals you see in Kantara. Like you don't like the usual jump scares we see are completely different. Here, like the
Yeah.
first time when in the forest when the sound comes in. I'm pretty sure the entire theater was afraid. I was afraid. The sudden when he starts out, just that portion. So how was it to light and design these jump scares? Because you don't want to make it a cliched horror film, because it is something else. It is a way different
Yeah.
thing. So how was that? How did that those things come into picture? And I also want to talk about that one shot when finally he understands what's happening, and there's this slow shot of the elder Rishabh slowly coming in, and that's not a jump scare anymore. It's just him
Yeah.
transforming, kind of a thing.
That's one. Yeah.
So how did you decide that this jump scare? How am I going to shoot the horror portions of Kantara?
One thing about jump scares was we didn't want to make it too scary because we have a lot of kids and elderly
Right,
people coming in.
right.
So if it got too technical or too scary, I think people wouldn't enjoy the jump scare.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they wouldn't enjoy it after the jump scare. So if the jump scares are extremely scary and every time there's another jump scare, people are just going to close their eyes and brace for it.
Correct.
So we didn't want to make the jump scares very scary, but at the same time, Shiva was he felt the jump scares, but because he's used to it, he knew it was coming,
Right.
and he would always know that that the figure would come. So that's how
Mm-hmm.
we wanted the audience to feel that they know it's going to happen. It's like an open jump scare where people know what's going to happen. But at the same
Yeah.
time, there's jump which you feel.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
didn't keep the night parts too dark. Usually for jump scares, it's very dark and eerie, and we didn't give so much time for build up also. So usually the
Correct.
biggest part of a jump scare is the build up.
Yeah.
So we cut build up and we went straight to the scare. So that way, the scares were not that scary, which is kind of working because people are feeling what Shiva would, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not getting too scared that they would not want to take their kids again to
Yeah,
watch it.
yeah, yeah. Also the interesting part of the like interval was the tree falling. Like
Yeah,
again, there is rain, there are trees, you have people walking in, going out. So, and you also said that one of the most challenges was the
the
tree.
tree falling episode. Yeah,
So how did you decide on how did you do that? Because, again, was it like how many days did you shoot that particular sequence along?
we shot that sequence for two nights. We finished it in 2 nights.
Lovely. Okay.
So initially, when we started off, I always kept saying we need more than 2 nights, but
Yeah.
then by then we were very tight on. We were almost exceeding our schedule by a big margin, so we couldn't afford to shoot another day. So we had to finish it in 2 nights. And interestingly, this is the first scene Rishabh narrated to me when
Okay.
he narrated Kantara. This was the first line he had for the movie, that there's a tree falling. So
Mm-hmm.
this has been etched in my mind from almost 6 months before we went to shoot, because this is the first visual I had.
Right.
And our biggest challenge was to get a tree in middle of a forest, and the location was such that there was absolutely no proper roads, there was no mobile network,
Mm-hmm.
there was zero connectivity, and even the water which they got for rain was from very far away. And if
Right.
two vehicles got on the road, they would literally jam up the entire place. So it
Right.
was a very location. So we had to have all plans in. We had to plan it perfectly, and even our lights. We went there multiple times during the day to figure out where our lights would be,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because there were big wides also. The interval shot, especially that single
Yeah.
shot,
Yeah. Correct.
that is pretty wide, and in during the night you can't see rain until it is backlit. Like
Correct.
uh, backlighting makes rain look more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to figure out a way to backlight the rain and yet not see the light in frame again. That was a big challenge, and that is something I learned while doing this. So we would overlap lights very far away behind trees, and we would have the camera axis almost 90 degrees to the lights, and so we got like 90 degrees backlighting to rain, and I think that looks pretty interesting now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm
It does.
actually happy that watching it on big screen. The initial image or reference of what we had for the scene, I think this is one thing we have pretty much matched whatever we wanted to.
So, as I was saying, when Rishabh was narrating the story to you, you have started imagining how it's going to look. So,
Yeah.
once the narration was done, and then you had this idea of how these scenes would look, and then finally you are making the film and then seeing on screen. How much of the image you had in your head has been translated on screen?
Uh, Most of the scenes which were in our control, the images have translated. Most
Right.
of the scenes are not in our control. And to be very honest, the climax sequence or the climax fight, initially what we had imagined and what was written was completely not this big in scale. It
Okay.
was a so that is something which none of us had imagined, that there will be so many blasts and bombs and all that. So
Yeah.
that's something completely out of syllabus for all of us. It just happened.
Okay.
So the climax portion is not something anyone of us would have imagined before shoot. It all just happened during shoot.
Like, as in the
Uh,
blasts and were not really planned. Like, so it
they were
happened.
planned, but not this big in scale. We had planned a few smaller blasts in the beginning and fire somewhere in the background.
Right.
We initially it was just one or two houses burning,
Mm-hmm.
but then it became a rampage after that. And after we saw one or two bombs, we loved the way it looked,
Right.
and it
Right.
made sense also because this is where it all leads to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we started. We would like look at that place. We just point our fingers and we blast a bomb there. And we had so many blasts in the set that when we used to pack up and go back to the room, all when you're sleeping, you could only see blasts in your dreams. It's
Right.
like when you welding for a whole day, you see the spark in your thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how it was. And even the bomb guy was very excited. I don't think he's blasted any bombs in his life.
He's like, Diwali is
He,
early for me. He's just
yeah,
happy
yeah.
doing it.
It was early for him. So we used to, there were times when we used to tell him, they usually put petrol in this bomb. We used to tell him 1 liter was sufficient for us. He would take an initiative, he would put 5 liters. He's like, enjoy. So that's how that was.
So you'll have to be like, all DOPs generally are very closely connected with the art department and everything. So especially with a film like this, it's not just just not the lighting, because the houses, for example, it has to look a specific way, and a lot of non-electricity portions are there in Kanta. Like, there's a lot of power cuts happening there, and then there's this beautiful shot of when the body of the other shaman is dropped. So there's this light that goes through the house, and there's a lot of things that you have to put, because there's no electricity. You have light from the jeep, and then there is this whole, again, a very mystic feeling to all of it. So, like, these things, these small asides that happen. I've always wanted to ask. I also spoke to Mr. Teni Ishwar, the cinematographer of Karnan. He was talking about how, if a DOP's work is out there, people understand it's a DOP's work. Some say it is not, like, too flashy, then people just say it is not a great thing. If it's very
Correct.
subtle, then they're like, we didn't even know what was happening. So as a
Correct.
DOP, where do you get your validation? Like, how do you know that if they are praising the lighting, they're praising the cinematography? So how do you discern the criticism or the validations you get?
I think as long as a movie is a hit in terms of its box office collection, and then they praise your work, then I think it's all balanced out.
Lovely.
And and especially in Kantara, there's not one department people are not liking. They've been raving about the music, the artwork,
Absolutely,
performance.
yes.
So I think cinematography doesn't stand out because everyone has done their best. And interestingly, about you spoke about the lights in the Kerry, right?
Yeah.
So there is this one deleted scene which happens.
Mhm.
So first time when Kishore and the DRFO enter to for the survey.
Yeah,
So
correct.
there's a
Yeah.
signal passed, and one of these villagers takes a stick and he disconnects their line because they've illegally
Like,
taken power from government lines.
correct.
So that scene is cut off. So initially,
Okay.
our idea was these guys have, they've even taken power illegally
Yeah,
from
theft of power
government.
that happens. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So that was our thing. So every time someone would enter, like for example, whenever the power was turned off, so
Hmm.
they would disconnect the power so that they would be invisible and come in. That was the
Correct.
agenda.
Yeah, yeah, correct.
So that was later cut off because of duration. But
Hmm.
we had a scene where we clearly shown where because logically it doesn't make sense for such a remote place to have so much of power,
Fair enough.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
lights and all that. So that is one thing we decided early on, that they're stealing power, so they can
Hmm.
have all the power they want, and they can
Hmm.
keep the lights on all the time because they don't pay
Yeah,
for it.
yeah, right. And so a cinematographer is, as I said, the first audience and the first person who responds to a lot of things happening on the set. How much of a script sense that you have, like you have developed over the years? Because, to be honest, films that you've worked on are easily some of my favorite Kannada films of the recent past. And they're all such varied genres. You've got, like, probably the forests of Kantara might be new, but what we spoke about earlier, the hero, there's a very distinct look to hero. Then there is, of course, 777 Charlie, which is, again, a wide landscape, this huge shift in landscape. So how much of script sense do you think a DOP should have? And when do you start, getting involved in the process of filming? Like, when do you come into the picture?
I think I've been lucky enough to kind of pick the projects I want to work on. I know for a fact that a lot of DOPs don't get to do that, and even I didn't get to do that initially. But I've been lucky enough to uh, shoot whatever I like watching. So initially, when I go for a narration or hear a new script, uh, my only criteria is if that would be a movie I would love watching on screen.
Right.
So unless I really like the visuals, which I can imagine, there's no point in me shooting that. I have to initially like the way it would look. I would have to imagine, and I would really want to go out and watch this movie if it was, even if it was not shot by me.
Right.
So that way, I think all the movies I've shot recently are the movies which I love from the initial scripting stages. So when it comes to Charlie, Hero, or this, the initial narration was moving for me, and that's how I've been there. And I think most DOPs kind of have a sense of what would work and what wouldn't.
Yeah.
But a lot of them don't have this luxury of picking the kind of projects they want to. So that is where I feel I have been lucky.
And slight comparison between Kantara and 777 Charlie, because there's two films that released this year. 777 Charlie was shot over a period of time. Like, and again, a lot of things were not in your control. Like, I was seeing an interview where saying about, it's about when the dog decides to react. It's when it
Yeah,
decides to
exactly.
move left or right, and then Kiran will say, yes, this is the shot I want, like that kind of a scene. And here you're making a film with, let's say, you can't have the third day of shoot because 2 days you had to finish a scene.
Yeah.
So it's a complete two different thing. And I think was Hero shot during the pandemic.
Hero was shot during first
So
pandemic.
again, you have the restrictions there. So you work on a lot of restrictions, don't you? There's a lot of things that happens around you. So how is it
Yeah,
to get around those?
yeah. Hero was completely different from all of these movies because it was just a bunch of us, 24 of us, who went into a forest and shot and came back. But when it comes to Charlie and Kantara, the main difference is Charlie, we had a lot of time to sit and think and plan and sketch it out. And I mean, Charlie Kirandas was very particular about his visuals because he had his storyboards, and he exactly had proper references, visual framing, and all that to what we would do. But in Kantara, it was mostly shoot on the go. And luckily, looking back now, because we didn't have any time, there was no time for us to sit and think back, kind of analyze what we're doing also. We
Yeah.
just went with the flow. We would sleep for 4 or 5 hours, get up and go shoot. So we just went with our gut feeling and we went with the flow. We didn't have time to even sit back and think. I think first time I actually saw all the rushes was after we shot it. Usually in
Okay.
other movies, we check rushes every day.
And then have a look
So
at
for
it and yeah.
Kantara, yeah, first few days in Kantara, we used to check rushes. Then it became so we should shoot for long hours, and even the guy who converts rushes used to do it after a day or two because he didn't get
Right.
enough sleep.
Yeah.
So after a point of time, I stopped checking rushes, and I think Kantara is one of the first movies where I have seen rushes only after we shot the full movie.
So it's almost like you just knew what I was doing and just went on with it day in and day out.
Just hoping that we knew what we were doing. We didn't know if we were on the right track. Just hope that whatever we were doing was right. So, and yeah, there was a lot, not only time or the short period. There were a lot of constraints on set. We would have winds, rain, and all that, but we just kept doing whatever we did, and we hoped that it would all come out good.
And just talking about again these three films, each of it taught you something distinct, didn't it? Like, let's say if Hero taught you how to finish a film with a compact space, and then you have 777 Charlie, which is again over the years, and then you could decide and choose, and then you have Kantara, with which is, as you said, I didn't even see the rushes. So so these three films, what are probably the most distinct learnings that you have, and how is it to now, probably with three films, you have understood three different worlds of making films?
Yeah. So with Hero, I learned. I actually realized who's actually important and not important on the set. I kind of figured out that if the story is strong and if you have a great team, we can actually do it with most of the people who are working on sets if it
Right,
comes to good content.
right.
And with Charlie, I learned perseverance and patience and to never give up and keep going. And I think with Kantara, I learned to be optimistic because there were 1 million things that could go wrong in Kantara. We
Hmm.
were most of the times we were underprepared, but
Yeah.
then and I would sometimes, kind of point out to all this and feel pessimistic about all this and kind of be pragmatic. But then Rishabh was very optimistic. He was beyond all pragmatism. He was
Mm-hmm.
like, "This will happen. We will do it. It will be good." So I think that's worked out. Rishabh's motivation has pushed most of us in
Right.
Kantara.
Yeah.
So from Kantara, I've learned to always be positive and optimistic. Things will go well.
And then talking about Rishabh, like you filmed him Hero, and then that has him in a completely different space. And what you saw in Kantara is probably the Rishabh that not many of us have seen at all. And for
Yeah.
you, who's been a close collaborator with him the past two films, how was it to look at him firstly as an actor and then as someone who's directing and acting? Because he's doing two jobs, and you'll have to also look at the actor part of it and listen to the director part of it. So how is it to work with someone who's doing both?
Yeah. So my first movie with him as an actor was Bell Bottom. In
Oh yeah,
Bell
yeah,
Bottom,
correct.
so
Jai
after that we
Theatre's
shot
film.
Hero.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
After that we shot Hero, and then so I've always from Bell Bottom I've always been wanting to shoot his film which he would direct.
yeah,
So initially supposed to be Rudraprayag where he would just direct. So I was really looking forward to that, and then all of a sudden Kantara happened.
yeah,
And I just know one thing: the amount of energy he has, not only directing and acting. I'm kind of scared that next movie he would want to shoot it also. So he has so much of surplus of energy. I won't be surprised if he takes up one more department. Like I'm, and I also he keeps saying that he wants to learn music as well, so that he could compose his own songs also. I won't be
yeah.
surprised if he takes over a few more departments. That's the amount of energy he has. So he's like this one huge source of energy on set. So when he comes onto set, people who are sleeping, people who are lazing around, all of them just come and report, and it's like this military drill where everyone gets into place.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he and his energy is very fluid. It passes on to people. So that's one thing I love working about him.
And both Kantara and 777 Charlie became pan-Indian films. Like it didn't start off as pan-Indian film, and suddenly everyone's talking about Kantara in Hindi. It's releasing in Hindi, Telugu, Tamil, like tomorrow. And then there are a lot of like just moving out from your core audience kind of a thing. So how is it to have your film suddenly become pan-Indian? Like I understand if you plan a pan-Indian film with that kind of. I'm asking as a technician who's worked on the film, and you look at the response it's getting now. So how do you see? Because let's say if you had already knew it was a pan-Indian film, you'd have probably had different kind of planning of how shoot filming the entire sequences. The certain things you might have added or removed. So now when you see the film organically becoming pan-Indian, does it make you feel better, or you think we've done something else?
First of all, it feels very gratifying and great. I'm actually very grateful that people are accepting our movies across the country. And for an artist, that's the biggest kind of achievement you can get. Feel very
Yeah,
happy that people want to watch this movie across. And I feel that if we had known all along that this was going to be pan India, it would have put extra unnecessary pressure on us
right.
because we had a lot of pressure already while shooting this. So this idea of pan India or wider audience kind of puts in a lot of unnecessary thoughts where you start self doubting and start overdoing things
Hmm.
in order to reach great audience. So the fact that all throughout we didn't know that this was going to be in five different languages kind of made our work easier. I don't think we would have done anything differently, but we would
Right.
have just overthought and overdone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So finally, I just heard that Vilayat Buddha, the film you're working on,
Yeah,
the director came to you after seeing Kantara's teaser.
yeah.
So,
I actually
yeah, yeah. So how was that validation? Because before seeing the final product, someone's trusting you with this film. So how was that validation getting from your peers, filmmakers, kind of thing?
I had to pinch myself on this because I never thought this would happen. I actually, Jayan is the director. He came and
Yeah,
met me while I was actually grading Charlie after Kantara teaser.
right.
So initially, I didn't think it was possible because I've been a huge fan of Prithviraj,
Okay.
and this was one of my long-term bucket list goals that I had to shoot this movie sometime.
Yeah.
And when I got the first call, I didn't believe it, and I didn't think it would happen this early or this fast. But then I think, yeah, Jayan kind of, when he wrote the screenplay and the script, he had a visual in his head, and when he watched Kantara teaser, it kind of resembled whatever he wanted. So that is how we got in touch. Then we discussed and kind of figured out that what the kind of visuals he had in his mind uh, is the kind of visuals that I love shooting as well. And it's a great script, and with Prithviraj. So I think we're going to start shooting in 4 days. Until we shoot, sure, I don't know if it's really happening because it's also out of the box and magical how it happened.
So, final question. Kantara has been getting brilliant responses across India, across the world. Um, what is one praise that feels very close to heart for you, like across board, be it from within the fraternity or outside? What is something you'll always keep close to your heart?
I think whatever Rishab told me at premiere while we were watching together. So I think that acknowledgement of whatever we've gone through, the struggle throughout the movie, and I always felt that I didn't get enough time for post production on this, or I could have done more. Well, he gave me this calming approval, and he said it's all going to be fine, it's great, and your work is really good. So that is when I was relieved also, and that's one thing I would remember for a long time. After so much of, I think 2 weeks before release, we hardly slept. Uh, we were in Kochi doing final post production, and we had very tight timelines, and we had a lot of work to do. So that is one time again, just like the movie, I didn't even get time to sit down and think about what we're doing,
Yeah,
check if the colors are all fine. We just went with flow. And usually after grading Charlie, for example, after grading Charlie, we had multiple previews where we would watch and do corrections. Kantara, the first preview we had was on Cube. Cube is the
right.
where we
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
And the second final check we did was with the audience.
right.
So there was going around that if there are any corrections, the audience will tell us because we were watching with them. So the fact that in spite of all the hurdles and all the scary timelines, that it just happened and it's worked out is kind of very fulfilling.
So, thank you very much for your time. I know you're busy, and you took our time
No,
for
absolutely, I
talking
love.
to us, and I loved this conversation. I loved the film. I remember I walked out of the film. I watched a night show. I thought I should text you then, but then I was like, no, no, you should talk to him in a daylight time and not again like a night time. So like next day morning, I'll text you. So it was a very, very, very lovely experience watching Kantara and that world that you and Rishabh and everybody created for the world to see. So thank you so much for your time and all the very best for
Thank you
Vilayat
so much.
Buddha and whatever you're doing next.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.